Hi, I'm Hannah Cruz at the Church Musician's Assistant, and today I'd like to give you guys a rundown of how I put together my reharmonization of the tune Resignation, otherwise known as My Shepherd Will Supply My Need. And I'm going to talk about a couple methods and tips for writing your own. So hang on through this whole video. I know it's a little bit long, but I hope it will be worth it for you, or at least enjoyable. So I'm going to play through this tune with its original harmony, the 1986 harmony, first, so you can get that in your ear. I'm going to first talk about how you can reharmonize with a pedal point and give an example of that. I will also give an example of how you can reharmonize using tertian extensions. And then I will go into depth with my own reharmonization, where I use quite a bit of chromaticism. And I examine the text to help me determine what kind of chords I use. Now I want to show you an example of if we just did some simple reharmonizing over a pedal point. And oftentimes the fifth of the beginning chord works well as a pedal point. Not always, but it's a good first try. So we're in the key of C, therefore the fifth would be a G. So we'll pop the G into the bass and see how that sounds with the chords that are already written. Okay, so most of that sounded pretty good over the pedal point G, except for the A minor chord. That didn't sound awesome. So instead of A minor, let's drop it down to F major. So we'll have the 4 chord over the 5th in the pedal. Let's see how that goes. Much better. Okay, so also I changed the E minor chord to just a regular C chord. Oftentimes if a chord doesn't sound quite right over the pedal tone, you can just experiment by dropping that chord down a third. Like the A minor or the E minor chords, I dropped those down a third. Okay, so let's try all of that in context now. Etc. through the rest of the hymn. So that could be a great option for a final verse, because that 5th in the pedal creates a lot of desire to want to resolve that. And so Consequently, it creates a lot of energy and excitement. Okay, another easy thing you can do to reharmonize, especially on the fly, is to extend chords down by a third. Think about tertian harmonies and stacked thirds. That's all we're doing here. So, for example, in the key of C, you have your C chord, and then if you drop the root by a third, you get a 7. If you continue to drop the bass a third, you get that's F9. And even, let's go down further. Okay, so that is an 11th. And then one more, you get a 13th. All of those chords are options for our beginning chord of C if we want to reharmonize using this tertian extension method. Okay, so let's take just the first half line of this tune and see what we can do with this method. So we're going to start out in C, and let's drop that bass, let it pull down as the melody pulls us up. Okay, so now we've extended the bass down a third with our A minor chord. Continuing on, we have G, and let's keep going down. Now, instead of C major, we've got F7, and then instead of G, let's do E minor, and then instead of A minor, we're going to drop the bass down to D, which means the C in the melody is the 7th of that D minor chord. So we're on D minor. And then to round out the phrase, let's go 2, 5, 1. So our D chord is the 2, and then we go to 5, which is G, and then 1 with a nice suspension there. Okay, so all of that together goes like this. C, A minor, G, F, E minor, D minor, and then G7, C. And you can continue throughout the tune using that sort of idea. And that's a really easy way to reharmonize, especially on the fly. Now I want to get into more complicated reharmonizations that are not exclusively diatonic. So we can get into chromaticism some, for example, which can be really fun, especially if you want to bring color to a particular phrase of text or a particular word. Let's look at verse 2 of this hymn, because I think that this verse lends itself the most well of all the verses to a reharmonization. When you're coming up with a reharmonization that's more free and not exclusively sort of inspired by the original diatonic harmonies, the only thing that matters in the end is that the note in the melody is prominent and not too obscured, and that it works well with the other pitches that you've chosen to harmonize it. Write out the melody on a separate sheet of staff paper, and this is always the most important thing. Even if you want to change a chord in a certain way because you think it's cool, if it causes the melody note to change or causes that to sound too bizarre for the congregation, then you can't do it, unfortunately, because making the congregation feel supported and inspired is absolutely, that comes first. It always comes first before any cool harmonies that you want to do. Once you have the tune written out for yourself, go through it and determine which notes are the most important notes of the melody, the arrival notes. Let's call them that. Which notes are arrival notes and which notes are like traveling notes, okay? Most important and less important notes. For example, in the first phrase, we have, so I would say the first two notes are rather insignificant compared to this G. And then the next two notes are also less important. And the E is our next arrival tone. You can tell which notes are arrival pitches usually by a couple criteria. One is length of the note. So the G right there is longer than all the surrounding notes. For the most part, longer notes take precedence over shorter ones. Also, when it is on the downbeat of the measure, it is often of more importance than others. Not always, sometimes it's a suspension or something, but often. And then you can also look at the harmonies of the original version and see which pitches fit into that tonal structure and which are passing tones, anticipations, suspensions, those sort of things. The non-chord tones will be less important than the diatonic chord tones. So as long as the melody note sounds acceptable in your reharmonization chords, then the chord is acceptable, in my opinion. That leaves you a lot of options, and maybe that's slightly overwhelming. If it's overwhelming, I'd say start with the bass and try to create a bass line that has a nice melodic quality to it. As in, you don't want the bass notes to be jumping all around. It will sound nicer if the intervals are fairly close together and it has its own sort of melodic quality, counter melody to the actual melody, right? That being said, we can actually experiment with some chromaticism, which is so fun. I love chromaticism, especially for bringing out texts like, "When I walk through the shades of death, your presence is my stay." Okay, so let's try something. We'll start with C major as is written. Now, let's move the bass down chromatically. That kind of works, right? That's cool. So let's see how we can fill in those harmonies if we like that bass line. And then we have this nice B flat now, B flat and G. So let's go back to the principle of tertian chords. What if we played a B flat chord right there? I'm playing a fifth in the left hand because I haven't decided whether I want the quality of the chord to be minor or major yet. Let's try both. That's kind of cool. Let's try minor. Ooh. Okay, that's definitely spicier. So that just depends on personal preference, I think. Oftentimes the quality of the chord, whether it's minor or major, really doesn't affect the overall, trajectory of the harmonies that much. So oftentimes it'll just be up to you, what kind of a color you want there. If the melody note, let's say, were D here, a D natural, then you would not want to use D minor, obviously. So if the melody note clashes with the chord, like I said, sorry, you can't use it. But in this case, our melody note is G. And the G with the B flat and the bass happens to be the 13th of the chord. So I'm going to go with the minor quality because I think it's more of a, shades of death kind of thing. Now the bass is resolving to the A. Okay, so we could make this an A major chord coming off of the B flat, or we could make it an F chord by holding the F from the B flat chord and naturaling the C. Now the G will be holding over all of this. That's fine. Let's try both. So starting with the A major one. B flat. That doesn't really sound so great, and I think the reason is because B flat is very loosely, as in not at all, related harmonically to A major. However, B flat is strongly related to F major. So if we do it the other way, that's really nice. And the G wants to pull down to F, of course. B flat is related to F, 5-1, dominant to tonic right there. And we also get a strong harmonic pull from these two inner voices, well, the bass and the inner voice, moving in parallel thirds with each other. Okay, moving on, we've got an A flat coming up in the bass with the melody there. So I would say with the inner parts, just keep on moving down in parallel intervals. That means we have moved to an E major 7 chord here with the third, or G sharp, in the bass. Now where does E go to? Where does E dominant go to? Well, it wants to go to A. Either A minor or A major. However, I'd caution against changing the C so early to a C sharp because, well, first of all, it doesn't fit the text. And also, C natural is the center of this tune, the center of the key, and also it comes up in the melody a whole lot. So if you change that to a C sharp, could be a bit confusing for the congregation when they sing their next C. Let's play through our first 3 measures now. Nice, right? So I went on and did the rest of that line in the same style of chromaticism and, thinking about the bass line being fairly melodic. Alright, so we had chromaticism. We had a lot of tension, and whenever you build up tension, before too long, you've got to let it release and give them something that they can hold on to. And so I did just that. I gave them a nice A minor chord. Let me play that all together again. A minor with the 7th in there, just for funsies. The second bit of the line, your presence is my stay, I want this to be more diatonic, sweet, comforting sounding. Not all of those chromaticisms and dissonances. So let's stick with mostly the original harmonies. All I did was change the last three measures from E minor, F, C, G. I just slowed down the harmonic progress and went 2, 5, 1. I went D minor, G7, C. With some nice color tones and passing tones in there too. The second line of the hymn, the text says, "One word of your supporting breath drives all my fears away." And so this is the opposite of the first line where we had tension and release. Now we have calm, calm, build up to some tension in the text. So we can mimic that with our harmonies. Let's keep the harmonies of the first half of the line really simple, almost identical to the original. We can do, so we're coming off of the C chord, one word, okay? So I basically kept everything the same, a couple alterations, color tones. Now the next phrase, let's go back to our chromatic bass idea. Instead of this, which is nice, that's nice, but instead of that, let's do so that is the same chord that we used at the very beginning. Here's the beginning. Okay, so I want to use it again to hearken back to the beginning, both for the sake of the text and also for musical unity, coherency. So, and then we'll let it resolve just like we did at the beginning. Continuing on with the chromatically descending bass. And then look at that. We naturally arrive at G major 7. We could simply go back to C. That'd be all right. However, the text is saying we're driving all of our fears away at this point. So let's literally drive them away with our music. So now instead of going to C major, let's try out some other options. We're coming out of G7. You know, what other chords would C fit into? F? That would probably be the simplest option, because then we could just go 4-1. D major, B flat, or we could be even funkier and dabble outside of the diatonic chords. If we go back to that idea of an F chord, what if we made the F chord minor? So we would come into it. We could also take the F out and make A flat the bass, so that it's minor. Do you want it to be minor or do you want it to be major? That's personal preference. I think major fits the text better right here. A flat. Now, lest we forget where we are in the melody, your hand so that's where we're going. And we want to drive all our fears away. So we've decided we're going to use the A flat chord. And then G in the melody. Why don't we move down to G7? And that will pull us so powerfully into, finally, the C major chord that we have been wanting for so long. I'm going to keep the original harmonies from this section because we have driven our fears away. We win and we get that diatonic satisfaction. Your hand in sight of all my foes does still my table spread. It's triumphant. So here's a possible way that we could build into this diatonic third line of the hymn. Backing up just a little bit. Here's our A flat. Now, because I like spicy chords, let's use a diminished rather than a traditional dominant chord to get us to the next A minor resolution. Well, that's a German 6 chord. They're very useful and very fun. Now, for this last line of the hymn, we've been through trials and tribulations, and now we get this text. My cup with blessings overflows. Your oil anoints my head. This is a comforting bit of text, and so we need to move away from the dissonance. So one way we could do this is to just throw a pedal point in the bass. That's very simplistic. I went through and I added a couple chromaticisms because I couldn't help myself. And it also helps tie in with the rest of our reharmonization. So here's what I did. Okay, so you probably noticed that one chord that was pretty funky. That was a B flat chord. How did I arrive at that choice? Well, it was a combination of where I was at with my bass line and also what options, we have with the C in the melody. Moving down in thirds. And I chose this B flat to be in the bass. So again, this is how the line sets up the B flat. I'm in A minor there, and then F with a ninth. The ninth in the melody. And where does F go? F is the dominant of B flat. So logically, B flat works nicely there. And then we come out of that pretty abruptly right into C. Kind of a pop sound right there. And then it's pretty simplistic from there on to the end. some suspensions and so forth. So there you go. That's a rundown of how I put this reharm together and some ideas about how you could do your own. This is not extensive by any means, but it's just some tips and tricks that I use, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. So please comment below and tell me what you think of this, and if you have any other, pieces of advice that you'd like to add to the conversation. If you write your own reharm using these ideas, especially for this tune, I would love to hear it or see it. You can post that in the Hymn Arrangers Club on Facebook. Thank you for watching this far. I hope this has been helpful. I'm Hannah Cruz, by the way, at the Church Musician's Assistant. So until next time, I bless you and see you later.